School District for 37 years, where I taught this program way back to the first book. That's old way. Retired, but currently I'm the chairman of the Professional Standards and Practices Commission to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
I'm John Barrett. I'm a UCLA law professor teaching constitutional law in federal courts, among other things. And I've been associated with the Center for Civic Education since the beginning.
Hank Chambers, law professor, University of Richmond, teach criminal law, white collar crime, voting rights, among other things. And it's good to see you.
And you are?
Hello, my name is Grenor Sandhu. My favorite suffragette is Sojourner Truth because she was the first woman of color to stand up for women's voting rights.
Hello, my name is Aurora Simmons, and my favorite suffragette is my great-great-grandma, Ruth May Fox, who fought for suffrage in the great state of Utah.
Hi, I'm Rye Heil, and my favorite suffragette is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who fought on solitude of self.
Hello, I'm Murray Mayo, and my favorite suffragette is Susan B. Anthony for her bravery and determination when fighting for women's rights.
And on behalf of Unit 3, our advisor Gretchen Wolfen, and the state of Washington, thank you for judging us today.
Very good. And we get to the point where, what questions you want to ask? And that is number 2. Throughout history, each proposed expansion of the right to vote was greeted with opposition. What are the similarities and differences that characterize the opposition to expanding the right to vote? Why do you think that voting was not seen as a fundamental right at the birth of our nation? And in your opinion, are there any reasons to deny or restrict a person's right to vote? You may begin.
Suffrage is the pivotal right. Susan B. Anthony.
The idea of universal suffrage is relatively new in the scope of American history, and with every step in the expansive direction, the movement has been hit with opposition. Dating back to the nation's beginning, the founders initially gave property owners the right to vote because it was believed that they had the most stake in election outcomes.
This disenfranchisement was advertised by those opposing suffrage as keeping it with the rational, patriotic, and well-educated. This tactic of refusing the right to vote has been used throughout every major suffrage movement, including that of African Americans, women, and Native Americans, respectively.
What is unique about those who opposed women's suffrage in the early 1900s was that majority of them were women. Women were arguing amongst themselves over whether they wanted the right to vote. Other movements faced significantly less or no opposition from those benefiting from the suffrage.
For example, the National Organization Opposed to Women's Suffrage fought fiercely to keep the vote from women's hands in order to maintain a social structure that benefited married women who influenced their husband's vote. Another difference in opposition groups is how they fought the battle. For example, during the Civil Rights Movement, the Ku Klux Klan lynched, murdered, and committed inhumane crimes against African Americans. Whereas before the Snyder Act of 1924, which naturalized citizenship for Native Americans, they could not simply vote.
The differences in opposition to suffrage highlight differing power struggles throughout our history, as well as a recurring fear of change.
Voting rights were not interpreted as fundamental at the beginning of our nation because the founding fathers desired an educated voter body. Fundamental rights are those listed in the Constitution or recognized by the Supreme Court and receive extra protection. During the Philadelphia Convention, there was a need to see the Constitution ratified, so lots of controversial issues were left to stalemate. Citizenship and slavery were among these.
Since there was no definition of what it meant to be a citizen, voting could not be defined on a fundamental level. Additionally, historic civilizations such as Greece and Rome had democratic features, but groups such as women, slaves, and those who lived outside of the city could not vote. America and Western Europe devised the concept of the universal voter population.
The 14th Amendment provided the definition of citizenship as all persons born or naturalized in the United States. And soon after, the 15th Amendment was passed, which granted the same right to African American males. With citizenship now defined, voting began to be seen as a fundamental right. And in states such as Washington and Colorado, women were granted suffrage even before the passing of the 19th Amendment.
Later, it was enacted on the federal level thanks to laboratories of democracy that demonstrated its success. The voting age was lowered from 21 to 18 thanks to the passing of the 26th Amendment. By keeping the right to vote and excluding it as fundamental, the founders believed that they could better influence the future of our nation.
We believe there are reasons to deny or restrict a person's right to vote. The current restrictions being 18 years of age, a registered voter, and a citizen are appropriate. When someone is convicted of violating the laws underneath the Constitution and causing harm to society, they should have their right to vote restricted because they have violated the social contract, which holds those living in a society with a moral responsibility to one another.
This stems from Rousseau's natural rights philosophy. Some may argue that it has to determine one's educational level, but promote a more educated voter body. However, this would be seen as analogous with literacy requirements that suppress minorities in the South during the Jim Crow era until the passing of the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Another movement to deny one's right to vote is whether or not they own property. As seen seen as in the beginning of our nation, property ownership was believed that they had the most stake in our nation and therefore would vote more thoughtfully because of it.
Similarly to literacy tests, if property ownership became a requirement to vote, it would suppress many individuals across the nation as not every citizen owns property. The right to vote grants individuals the power to affect society, and that is why the founders did not give all individuals the right to vote.
It's also why we see opposition and riots for suffrage movements and why some people still need to see that right restricted today. Thank you.
So, who do you believe should be restricted in the ability to vote?
First answer would be felons. They have disregarded society and chosen to remove themselves from our population, what America holds dear. It makes no sense that they should have a say in who's leading our country if they're not even respecting the rules and laws in it.
I would respectfully disagree with my colleague. I believe that we should not alienate these people further. They've already served their time. Once they were released, we should focus on reintegrating them into society and focus on rehabilitation.
Adding on to what my colleague Armari was stating, in our own state of Washington, we have the ability to rehabilitate felons after they have completed their time, and they are granted their right to vote back after they are released from prison.
To add to my colleague, another issue, another reason we're seeing, another reason why we should have felon included is some people are convicted before they even have the right to vote right at the age of 18.
Is that it? Just felons should be restricted?
No, I also, personally, I do not believe that undocumented citizens as well as immigrants who are not staying here permanently should have the say in federal elections, as these decisions can greatly influence the future of our nation, and if you do not plan on staying here, you shouldn't be a part of it, as well as making sure that these people have the same values as we do and hold the Constitution in the same esteem. Not to say that every U.S. citizen does, but I think it is important that we should safeguard it.
I agree with my colleague. We have seen a push for this across the country to allow non-citizens to vote. In our own state of Washington and local and state elections, non-citizens are allowed to vote, but I feel that completely devalues what it means to be a citizen. How do we be proud of our country and hold ourselves accountable for letting anyone take part in this sacred right?
To disagree with my colleague, we allow non-citizens to vote at state and local elections because they're just voting on matters that would affect their own society and community that they are living in, not national matters.
So help me out. Voting is a fundamental right, but you want to restrict it. Is that how we tend to deal with fundamental rights, by restricting them?
Yes, for example, the First Amendment, fundamental right, one of my favorites. I think it is so important that we have the ability to speak our minds and to practice religion we choose and assemble, petition, but we restrict it. We have time, place, and manner restrictions. We have libel, we have slander. Not everything can be open. There must be restrictions on everything so we can all benefit what we're choosing to do in society.
Are time, place, and manner restrictions the same as the kind of limitations on the right to vote y'all are talking about?
No, these would be different. Obviously, time, place, and manner restrictions would be based off of an action that was inappropriate, then they would be reprimanded. Whereas this would be seen as if you have gone through the court system and then obviously, as we talked about in our essay, become a felon, then you have the right restriction. So I guess, yes, both are based on your current actions, but I feel that it is infinitely harder to lose your right to vote than are the free speech limited in today's society.
Okay. Go ahead.
I just got asked on the question of non-citizen voting. Would you distinguish between people who are lawfully admitted residents who are not citizens and those who are here unlawfully?
Well, no, I do not believe so, because it's hard to say. Like I said, I believe that, to reiterate what I said, I do believe that we need to be sure that, one, they're staying here, and that these decisions that they're making as far as federal elections are concerned, I'm more willing in a state and local election. But in a federal election, these decisions have major impacts on all of us, and have impacts for the future. And I want to be sure that you're staying here, you plan on staying here, and I want to be sure that you value the same values we do. Citizenship, to me, is a perfect mark of answering to both of those.
I feel there should be no discrimination between illegal immigrants and non-documented citizens. Again, if you're not a citizen, why are you voting in our elections?
Go for it.
So, let me get this right. You were in favor of some restrictions, and the question is, should we fear a minority of voters controlling votes and elections? I mean, is it possible that if I voted and I'm with the majority of voters, a minority of voters can restrict me or perhaps change the election? Is there a danger there?
Yes, there's a danger there. Obviously, there's always the issue of gerrymandering, which has been debated from the beginning of our history. If you feel that you're in difficult sometimes in the state of Washington. It's really hard as a Republican to then make you feel like your voice is being heard because we're such a democratic state.
We also live in a society full of many different cultures, many different peoples, which I do think is a strength despite my standing on this. But at the same time, politicians have to please these different groups in different ways. And so having undocumented non-citizens and undocumented workers vote, then our politicians also have to please them and meet their needs as well, maybe even above our citizens. And so that's why it's still a big issue because of the citizens.
Do you have thoughts about how to go about fixing gerrymandering so that there is voting that is more equal, that your votes count equally?
I feel like the first step would be taking a look at those states' do land issues. I personally think the best way to do this would be from a completely mathematical standpoint. I do not have the necessary means to do this myself, but I think it is so important that we are completely objective when we are looking at the issues of just population.
I would disagree with my colleague and say that we need a nonpartisan individual to draw these district maps so that they can be quite representative of the individuals living in that district. One example of a very heavily gerrymandered state is Maryland. Most of the districts are gerrymandered, and currently there's a court case in the Supreme Court docket, Merrill v. Milligan, in which there is one district in Alabama where it is majority black voters and the rest of the districts are not, and it is not equal representation of all the individuals of the state.
When you say there isn't equal representation of all people in the state, are you suggesting it violates one person when vote or something else?
I would say that the issue in Maryland is that it seems to be very strategically planned where these voters are taking place, and that can definitely influence their surrounding districts.
So do you suggest that proportional representation is required by the Constitution?
I don't think proportional. I do feel like the Electoral College, though sometimes difficult if you're on the losing side, it makes sure that all the states feel that they have an important part of our Constitution. During the founding of our country, this is one of our biggest compromises. We need to make sure that all states felt included, the small populations and the big ones, and that's what the Electoral College does.
To ask my colleague another reason, the way that our Congress is set up, we have equal representation from states in the Senate with two senators from each state, but we also have proportional representation in the House of Representatives, more so representing population size.
But with the Electoral College, don't we run the risk that a minority can control power?
I actually think that's somewhat of a strength of the Electoral College. Now, there's many criticisms of it, but I actually really like this as it gives the minority a voice. I think that the tyranny of a majority is very much a real risk, and this is why we're not a direct democracy where it's mob rule. A minority would never get a say. I can only imagine how our history would have turned out if it was this way. How would have African Americans fought for their rights? How would women have fought for their rights? How would any other oppressed group fought for their rights? And so I believe that giving the minority a say is a strength of our nation.
It's a say different from controlling through vote. I mean, if I take control, how can I get a bipartisan group if my interest is to keep the ability to control my minority?
I think this is one of the many difficult issues in our nation. We have to make sure that as a representative that we are not only fueling our own political parties and those who fund our campaigns, but also the entire our district or state. When discussing with our own district representative from Shore yesterday, she discussed the difficulty of trying to represent both parties across the state of Washington, as we are a very politically divided district.
You can breathe. What fun, huh? I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the discourse that we had. It's an interesting balance that a minority can take control, and I would like to have gone deeper with that and further explored that, but wonderful job. Nice job.
Thank you. I agree. Our Constitution is very minority protective. And, that's, unless we amend it, that's the way it's going to stay. Here in Washington, not quite as bad as some of the other states. I'm in California. 2 senators per state seems a little not so good on the right to vote influence, but very good conversation. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Agreed, it's a hard issue because at the founding, their vision of voting is very different than our vision today. So getting from there to here and how far we should go from there to here is difficult. So being able to talk about it and deal with those particular issues in a coherent fashion is really tough. So it's a good conversation. So sorry, it's over.
It's over.
Sorry, our taskmaster tells us it's over.
You got a few minutes.
For those parents who are here, thank you for coming. I mean, cool, isn't it?
There you go. Thank you, Gretchen.
All right.